Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video, getting back to some more weapon builds. In this one, I'm going to be focusing on a few builds that are based on barters available through some of the traders. There's a ton of weapons that you can trade for instead of just paying with cash, and a lot of these trades let you save a lot of money and set up cheap, effective builds, or at least let you shave off a good chunk of the price of more expensive setups. In this video, I'm going to be looking at 3 different weapon builds that you can get access to around level 20, and I'll go over the barter trades as well as the extra parts that I add on to complete the builds. The price points on these builds are, in my opinion, amazing for what they actually offer in terms of performance and versatility, and hopefully will be a big help for players going through the mid-game quest grind and looking for some weapons that pack a punch but won't hurt the bank account too much. So with that all out of the way, let's take a look at the first build I have for you. A simple but extremely versatile M1A setup that gets you a powerful DMR with a 4x scope and backup reflex sight for a ridiculously low price. To start this one off, we have a build that uses one of my absolute favorite barter trades in the game, the standard M1A from Peacekeeper level 3, which trades for 8 USB adapters. The earliest you can unlock this trade is level 18 if you complete Skier's tasks early and start on Peacekeeper's quest chain. This trade is seriously underrated, and it lets you get access to one of the best semi-auto rifles in the game at a very cheap price. These USB adapters spawn everywhere in Tarkov, and you can find them in a huge supply on every map in the game. They spawn commonly wherever you might find electronics, as well as in bags, filing cabinets, jackets, and on dead scavs. You can often find all 8 of these that you need for the trade in a single raid if you know where to look. And because of this, you can also buy them on the flea market at a really low price and just trade them for the rifle. For this build, I'm going with a very simple budget-focused setup that can be put together at around level 20. The aim isn't to get the recoil super low or the ergonomics really high, but to create a cheap, effective rifle that can easily kill scavs and players. The M1A shoots 7.62 by 51 rounds, so if you're accurate and patient with your shots, you don't need it fully kitted to use it effectively. Gotta be dead now. To start off, you can get the ARMS number 18 mount for the M1A at mechanic level 2 for around 3,000 rubles. This allows you to mount a magnified optic onto the standard M1A for a very cheap price. Next, I'm using the Pylad 4x rifle scope that was added to the game in a recent content patch. This scope isn't the best out there, but it has a pretty good zoom, a nice clean reticle, and it's very useful as a budget ranged optic. This scope is actually cheaper than a bottle of water, and I've seen it on the flea market for as low as 5,000 rubles. To mount this scope, you'll need the UTG 25mm mount rings, sold by Jaeger level 1 for about 1,600 rubles. Next up, I always like to add a canted sight or some kind of backup reflex sight to my rifle when I run a magnified scope, and conveniently enough, the M1A comes with a rail on the front to mount the MPR-45 and attach a canted sight. If you're higher level, you can also get a front rail like the Mini Scout mount, which will add some ergonomics to the build. That's it for the build, and like I said, it's very simple but surprisingly effective in most situations because it fires a powerful, accurate round and has optics for both close range and long range shots. If you want to add a suppressor to this setup, you can purchase the SOCOM 16 threaded muzzle brake from mechanic level 4 or on the flea market, and then add the Gemtech 1 mount and suppressor from Peacekeeper level 3, but that's going to make the build significantly more expensive. The stats on this one aren't anything special, with 146 recoil and around 37 ergonomics, but it makes up for these numbers by giving you a lot of firepower and combat options for a really cheap price. The overall cost of this setup is where it really shines, coming in at around 60 to 70,000 rubles total, and that is if you bought all the USB adapters on the flea market. If you found all 8 of the USB adapters for the trade, this build is more like 30,000 rubles total, and an M1A build for that price with 2 optics is kind of insane to me. I'm definitely going to be using this as my main setup for the level 20 to 30 grind during the next reset. Next up is another barter trade that can be accessed around the level 20 mark, from mechanic level 2. This one is another budget-focused setup that can get you a nice, fully kitted Tapco SKS build for a bargain of a price. The SKS is a very reliable weapon at low levels, and with a nice build, it can be very useful for PvP and fighting scavs at pretty much any level. It might not have tons of crazy attachments and builds, but it's fairly accurate, powerful when using the right ammo, and relatively cheap. When it's suppressed, the SKS is also extremely quiet compared to other rifles, which makes it a very deadly weapon in the hands of a smart, stealthy player who likes ambushing squads with hit-and-run plays before disappearing into the mist. For this build, I'm basing it around a trade at mechanic level 2 for the Tapco SKS, which requires 1 GP coin. These coins are a fairly common drop in safes and on scab bosses, and they're on the flea market for around 27,000 rubles almost all the time. This is an amazing deal, since the SKS or the stock alone costs about that much from the traders, and it's very simple to finish kitting this one out. First, I add the Hexagon SKS suppressor, which you can find on the flea market for around 30,000 rubles or less most of the time. You can also skip this if you want and save a huge amount of the build cost, but that's up to you at the end of the day. The Tapco stock already has mounts for a foregrip and reflex sight, and you can mount most reflex sights on this setup, but unfortunately, you can't get a magnified optic on here unless you switch the parts over to an SKS with a dovetail mount on the side. For the sight on this one, you can use whatever you prefer, but for good cheap options, you can use the Burris Fastfire sight from Peacekeeper level 1 or the P1X42 sight, which is usually cheap on the flea market. I also added a SOP mod stock to this build, which you can get from mechanic level 2 for about 5,000 rubles, and if you sell your old stock back, it barely costs anything. Finally, you can attach either a foregrip or a tactical device on the bottom rail. Skier level 2 has a good cheap option in the Tango Down stubby grip. Peacekeeper level 3 has one of my favorites, the RVG grip, or you can add something like the X400 flashlight to have both a light and laser to use instead. For the stats on this one, the recoil is about 98 points and the ergonomics is at 63. Like the M1A build, this one is less about the raw stats and more about putting together a versatile suppressed rifle on a decent budget. The overall cost of this build is around 75,000 rubles, and that's including the price of buying the GP coin on the flea market. If you found the coin, it would be about 48,000 rubles, and much less if you don't run the suppressor. If you take some green gunpowder and craft 7.62 BP rounds in the hideout, this setup will let you slay thick boys on a pretty nice budget, and I had a lot of fun while using it.
Вон он, блядь! Его!
The final build I have for this video is a bit more complex and essentially provides a quick, easy, and relatively cheap way to set up an M4 with some top tier attachments after you get the Bitcoin farm going. The trade this build is based around is once again at mechanic level 2 and requires 1 Bitcoin and 1 GP coin to get a short barreled M4A1 with the SAI handguard, jailbreak muzzle device, an upgraded receiver, and a 60 round mag, plus a bunch of other attachments. 1 Bitcoin is around 145,000 rubles on the flea market, or if you have the Bitcoin farm in the hideout, you literally get multiple for free every day. This, plus about 27,000 rubles for the GP coin, comes out to around 170,000 rubles total for the trade. Considering there is pretty much 200,000 rubles worth of attachments on this M4, if you include the upgraded receiver and expensive mag, it's already a pretty good deal. Next, you can take several parts off of this M4 and sell them on the flea market for a pretty good price, and then use that money to get different attachments and take the build to the next level. These parts are the Grey Raptor charging handle, the UH1 reflex sight, and the Daniel Defense wave muzzle brake. The charging handle, believe it or not, can sell for over 30,000 rubles on the flea market because it's a unique color and some people will pay a lot for that. The muzzle device will go for around 12,000 or so, or you can keep it if you want to run a suppressor, and the reflex sight sells for around 25,000 rubles on the flea market. After selling these, I take this money and finish off the build. First, I add the Bulletech ST6012 flash hider, which combined with the jailbreak muzzle device is top tier for recoil on the M4. If you want to run a suppressor, you can just sell off the jailbreak muzzle device for about 20 to 30,000 on the flea market, and then buy the waved suppressor and just attach it to the muzzle device that's already on this one. Next, I replaced the UH1 sight with an Elcan Spectre DR1-4 scope, though you can use whatever sight you prefer here since everyone likes a different scope. However, for 30,000 rubles or less, this scope is very versatile for the price. I also swapped the foregrip to a Zenit RK1 to get some more recoil control, and since the build already has high ergonomics, this one is a pretty good option. Finally, you need to replace the charging handle, and the two best options here are the Badger charging handle or the Raptor charging handle. Depending on what level you are and how much you want to spend, pick one of these. For the stats on this one, the recoil came out to 44 points, which is quite low for an M4 with a short barrel, and the ergonomics is about 74 points total. You might be tempted to change the stock out, but with the recoil pad on this one, it's actually only 1% away from the best in slot numbers, so I just leave it on. For the total cost on this setup, if you run it with the L-can like I have in this build and sell the extra attachments on the flea market as I recommended, you're looking at around 170,000 rubles for this setup. That's including the price of the Bitcoin and GP coin purchased from the flea market. So if you use a Bitcoin from the hideout, this build is basically a free high-end M4 to load up and head out for some PvP. This might not seem like a budget-friendly option at first, but this M4 has well over 150,000 rubles worth of attachments on it alone, not including the cost of the M4 itself, so you're actually saving a lot by doing this trade. Well, that about covers it for these 3 builds. I had a lot of fun crafting these from the barter trades that are available, and I'm actually quite excited to try making more like this. Let me know what you think of the builds in the comments, especially if you try one out, and post your favorite barter trades down below because I'd love some ideas for future builds. I'll be streaming more Escape from Tarkov on Twitch, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll leave a link for that down below. I'll also be linking my Twitter and Discord for you to stay notified on my stream schedule, and there's a link to my Patreon page as well, and it would mean a lot if you consider checking it out. It's a real big help and allows me to focus more and more on the channel. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.